It was just another Tuesday when I walked into the family court for the last time. Or at least that's what I thought. After months of exhausting legal battles, today was supposed to be the final hearing for my divorce from Sarah. Kevin, my lawyer, walked beside me with his usual confident look. "It's all going to be fine," he said. "We've got the prenup, we've got all the necessary paperwork." The courtroom was pretty much empty when we got there. We picked our seats and waited. That's when the doors opened and Sarah walked in, with a huge pregnant belly that destroyed all my plans, while her satisfied smile seemed to say, "Gotcha," like a predator that finally corners its prey. My blood ran cold. Kevin leaned in and whispered, "Did you know about this?" "No way," I muttered through clenched teeth. "We've been separated for over 10 months. Sarah's eyes met mine as she walked down the central aisle. A little smirk crossed her face, as if she was saying, "Gotcha." Her lawyer followed her, carrying a thick stack of documents. I immediately suspected that they had prepared a new set of demands, completely ignoring our prenup. My mom, Dorothy, who was sitting a few rows back, let out an audible sigh. She'd asked me the week before to consider a settlement with Sarah. "Sometimes it's easier to just pay to get rid of the problem," she said. Now, I could feel her worried gaze on my back. "Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this." "All rise," announced the bailiff, and Judge Henderson walked into the room. He looked over the papers in front of him, then at Sarah, and frowned. "I see we've got an unexpected twist," he remarked dryly. Sarah's lawyer quickly took the floor. "Your Honor, in light of this new development, we'd like to request a reconsideration of the prenup. Ms. Peterson is expecting a child, and that completely changes the nature of this divorce case." The judge looked directly at Sarah, then at me, and then asked the question that wrecked all her plans. "Ms. Peterson, who is the father of the baby?" "Jason, obviously," Sarah replied, placing her hands on her belly. "We were still married when—" "Excuse me, Your Honor," interrupted Kevin, standing up. "We've got documentation proving that's impossible." Kevin wasn't smiling for nothing. As he opened his folder, I felt a hint of relief. In the past few weeks, we'd compiled all the medical records, including tests confirming that Sarah's pregnancy started at most 6 months ago, well after our separation. "Your Honor, your own Ms. Peterson's tests show that conception happened in March. The couple's been apart since last July, with 0 physical contact since then, as confirmed by previous witness testimonies." Sarah turned pale. The judge carefully examined the documents, while her lawyer desperately tried to argue that the tests might be wrong. "Furthermore," continued Kevin, "we have text messages between Ms. Peterson and a guy named Mike, with whom she started dating shortly after the separation." "This is outrageous!" The judge banged his gavel forcefully after 20 minutes of reviewing the evidence. "This court does not tolerate attempts at fraud. The prenup will be fully upheld, and I am referring this case for further investigation into possible perjury." Sarah stood up, furious. "You can't do this. It's not fair. Ms. Peterson, control yourself or you'll be removed from the courtroom," warned the judge. As the bailiff moved closer, Sarah turned toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You planned this, didn't you? Always so perfect, so prepared. You really think you can just get rid of me like that?" I kept silent while Kevin calmly put our documents away. When the judge declared the session over, Sarah advanced towards me. 2 bailiffs quickly grabbed her by the arms. "This isn't over, Jason. You owe me, after everything I did for you." "Ma'am, you need to calm down right now," one of the officers insisted as they escorted her out. My mom came over and patted my shoulder. "Was she always like this? How did I not see it before?" "She's really good at hiding who she is," I replied, watching Sarah being led away, still shouting about how I had ruined her life. The following days were surprisingly calm. Kevin called to inform me that Sarah had been fined for trying to dupe the court, and that her lawyer had dropped the case, claiming he wasn't informed about the real situation. "She even tried to get government assistance, saying that you left her without resources. But she was turned down once they found the inconsistencies in her story," Kevin explained. A week later, my mom called me. "Did you hear about Mike?" "What about him?" "Apparently, he found out he might not be the only one in her life. He left the apartment taking all his stuff." I didn't feel satisfaction, just relief that that chapter of my life was coming to an end. I focused on rebuilding my routine, getting back into sports, and reconnecting with friends I had lost during the marriage. But the peace didn't last long. On a Thursday morning, I got a notification from the bank. Someone had tried to access my accounts using my personal information. The attempt to access my accounts was just the beginning. Sarah seemed determined to get some money from me, no matter what it took. First, I found out from a coworker that she was spreading rumors that I'd evaded taxes and hidden assets during the divorce. She called 3 people from the office, my coworker Thomas said. She was trying to find someone who could give information against you. Later that day, Kevin told me that Sarah had filed a court appeal claiming that our prenup was signed under duress. Don't worry, he assured me. We have the video of you signing the contract and even her lawyer's statements from back then. It won't go anywhere. The appeal was rejected in record time. Judge Henderson, already familiar with the case, didn't even schedule a new hearing. A week later, I was surprised by a visit from an old mutual friend, Melissa, whom I hadn't seen in years. Sarah reached out to me, she explained, visibly uncomfortable. She wanted me to testify that you were abusive during the marriage. When I refused, she suggested I make up something convincing because you deserved to lose everything. I shook my head, exhausted by that endless situation. Thanks for telling me, I replied, and for not going along with it. She doesn't seem well, Jason. She's desperate. Sarah's despair reached a new level when I got a call from the bank manager on a sunny Monday. Mr. Peterson, we have a loan document bearing your signature requesting a credit release of $50,000. Could you confirm this transaction? My stomach dropped. I didn't sign any loan documents. That's what we thought. The signature looks authentic, but some elements don't match our standard protocols. Could you come to the branch to file a formal complaint? 2 hours later, sitting in the bank's meeting room, I looked over the forged document. The signature was nearly an exact copy of mine, probably taken from our marriage contract or some other document that Sarah had access to. We'll need to involve the police, explained the manager, a balding, middle-aged man named Robert. This is a serious fraud attempt. On my way home, I received a text from an unknown number. We could settle this easily. $25K and I'll make that loan document disappear. Otherwise, I've got other documents you really don't want the police to see. I immediately forwarded the message to Kevin and the detective handling the case. In less than 24 hours, Sarah received a subpoena for attempted extortion. She really crossed the line, Kevin commented when we met to discuss the new developments. Judge Henderson is furious. Besides the criminal charges, she's going to have to cover all your legal costs for these new attempts. When is this going to end? I asked, running a hand across my tired face. People like Sarah only stop when they face some real consequences, Kevin replied, adjusting his glasses meticulously. And it looks like those consequences are finally catching up. That night, while I was having dinner alone in my apartment, I got a call from my mom. Dorothy was in tears. Sarah was here, she sobbed. She said horrible things, that you assaulted her during the marriage, that you stole her money. When I said I didn't believe her, she threatened to sue me for an accident that never happened. Are you okay? Did she hurt you? I asked, alarmed. I'm physically fine, just scared. I called the police, but she was already gone when they arrived. I'm on my way over now. I drove to my mom's house in a torrential rain, thinking about how Sarah had completely transformed into someone I barely recognized. Or maybe she always was that way, and I was just too blind to see it. While comforting my mom and filing yet another police report, I realized this war wouldn't be over until Sarah faced serious consequences for her actions. What I didn't know was that those consequences were closer than I ever imagined. A week after the incident at my mom's house, I was taken by surprise when a process server showed up at my office. He handed me a subpoena. Sarah had requested an emergency restraining order against me, claiming constant harassment, threats, and stalking. According to the document, I supposedly followed her around the mall, sent threatening messages, and even showed up at her new apartment in the middle of the night. All completely made up. That's ridiculous, I murmured as I read the outlandish allegations. Just show up in court on the scheduled date, replied the process server, sounding unimpressed. I see this all the time. I immediately called Kevin, who sighed deeply upon hearing about her new tactic. She's trying to turn the tables, he explained. If she gets that restraining order, it sets the stage for her to claim you're the aggressor. That could lead her to try to cancel the prenup on grounds of abuse, and it might even hurt you professionally. But it's all a lie. I have witnesses who can prove I was somewhere else on those dates, and we'll use that. But be prepared for an unpleasant hearing. She's probably going to put on an emotional show for the judge. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with a folder full of evidence. GPS records from my cell phone, purchase receipts, witnesses affirming my whereabouts on the dates in question, and even security camera footage from my building showing I never left on the nights she claimed I was stalking her. Sarah entered the room wearing sunglasses and walking slowly, as if she were fragile. When she removed the shades, her heavy makeup gave her dark circles and a look of pure fear. "Your Honor," began her new lawyer, a young man who seemed excessively anxious, "my client lives in constant terror. The defendant has shown obsessive and dangerous behavior, refusing to accept the end of the relationship." Judge Carolyn Watkins, a middle-aged woman, listened patiently as Sarah described in dramatic detail how I supposedly waited for her in her workplace parking lot and sent flowers with threatening notes. When it was our turn, Kevin calmly stood up. "Your Honor, not only do we completely deny these allegations, but we'll show they're entirely fabricated, part of a pattern of behavior by Ms. Peterson." Kevin then methodically presented evidence. First, the GPS logs from my cell phone showing I was at the gym or home on those supposed stalking nights, then witnesses proving I was elsewhere. Plus, Kevin continued, we have evidence that it was Ms. Peterson who was stalking my client. He played the security video from my mom's house, showing Sarah screaming at the door and then kicking a flower pot when no one answered. We also have these messages sent from disposable numbers, which our analysis confirmed were sent from a device registered in Ms. Peterson's name. As the evidence piled up, Sarah's face shifted. The feigned fear gave way to barely contained rage. Her lawyer grew increasingly uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Kevin concluded, "what we're seeing here is a clear attempt to manipulate the judicial system to continue a campaign of harassment against my client. Ms. Peterson has already tried to defraud this court before, as the records from your divorce case show." Judge Watkins looked sternly at Sarah. "Ms. Peterson, this court takes allegations of harassment and threats very seriously. However, we also take the misuse of the judicial system just as seriously." After a brief pause while reviewing the documents, the judge continued, "I am denying your request for a restraining order due to a lack of credible evidence. Furthermore, given the evidence presented by the defense, I am issuing a restraining order against you, prohibiting you from coming within 200 meters of Mr. Peterson, his residence, workplace, or any of his family members." Sarah abruptly stood up. "This is unfair. He's lying. Everyone's against me." "Ms. Peterson, control yourself," the judge warned, "or you will be removed from the courtroom." When we left the courtroom, Kevin put a hand on my shoulder. "That was an important win, but don't be fooled. People like Sarah, when cornered, can become even more dangerous." That night when I got home, I found all the plants from my garden uprooted and dumped at my garage door. I didn't have to try too hard to guess who had done it, even with the freshly issued restraining order. 3 weeks went by without incident. The restraining order seemed to be working, and I finally started to relax. I picked up abandoned projects, got back into playing tennis on the weekends, and even began considering that vacation I'd postponed because of the divorce. It was a Thursday night when my phone rang, showing an unknown number. Normally I wouldn't pick up, but something told me I should. "Jason, please don't hang up." Sarah's voice was almost unrecognizable, hoarse, trembling, missing that confident, manipulative tone I once knew so well. "Sarah, you shouldn't be calling me. There's a restraining order." I know, but I'm desperate." She sobbed on the other end. "I've lost everything. I got evicted yesterday. I'm sleeping in my car. Mike ran off with all the money I had saved." I stayed silent, just listening to her uneven breathing. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need money. Just a loan. $5,000 so I can get a place to stay and get back on my feet. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I closed my eyes, remembering all the times I believed her promises, and all the times her tears won me over. I also remembered every lie that was later discovered, every manipulation that left me emotionally exhausted. "Sarah, I can't help you." "Please, it's just a loan. What's it costing you? You always had everything so easy while I'm not going to argue about this. You have family, you have resources. The consequences you're facing are the direct result of your own choices. You're a heartless monster." Her voice immediately shifted, the tears giving way to that familiar anger. "After everything I did for you, I wasted years of my life on a man who never truly loved me. I'm hanging up now, Sarah. Don't call me again. You're going to regret this. Everyone's going to find out what kind of monster you really are. A selfish coward who abandons a pregnant, helpless woman." I hung up, blocked the number, and stared at my phone screen for several long minutes. Part of me wanted to believe she was really in trouble, that she needed help. But another part, the part that had painfully learned how to deal with her manipulations, knew it was just another tactic. The next morning, Kevin called. "Sarah got in touch with my office," he said. Apparently, she wants to negotiate a settlement. She said she's got compromising evidence about you, but would be willing to let it all go for a significant sum. What kind of evidence? She didn't give any details, which usually means there isn't any, but she mentioned something about secretly recorded conversations. What if she really did record something? Even if she did, recordings obtained without consent aren't admissible in our jurisdiction. Besides, with her history of fabricating evidence, it'd be hard to prove any authenticity to whatever she presents. I sighed, tired of this never-ending battle. What should I do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Any contact or money transfer could be seen as a violation of the restraining order, on your part. Plus, it'd give her material to claim that you're admitting guilt or debt. I agreed and hung up. That would be the last time I let Sarah's manipulations affect me. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. 2 months went by with no news from Sarah. Life was starting to get back to normal, and I could feel the weight slowly lifting off my shoulders. Then, one Sunday morning, while having coffee and reading the news on my tablet, I saw a short note in the local police report section. Woman arrested for fraud and identity theft. The article didn't mention any names, but something told me it was Sarah. A call to Kevin confirmed my suspicions. She tried to use her mother's ID documents to open new credit lines, he explained. It wasn't the first time either. The police found forged checks and credit cards in the names of at least 3 different people at the apartment she was living in. So she got herself a place to stay, I commented, unable to help feeling a bit relieved. Temporarily. She was sharing an apartment with 2 others, but hadn't paid rent for 3 months. The landlords were about to evict her when the police showed up. And now, she's in custody awaiting bail. Given the multiple charges and her recent track record, it's likely she'll be in jail for a good while. I hung up the phone and just sat there, contemplating the situation. I didn't feel satisfaction in knowing Sarah was behind bars, just a deep sense that a destructive cycle had finally reached its inevitable end. The following week, I received an official letter from the court. Sarah had been formally charged with defrauding at least 5 different people, including her own boyfriend, Mike, and her parents. The charges included document forgery, bank fraud, identity theft, and violating a restraining order. The prosecutor is asking for 3 to 5 years in prison, Kevin explained when we met to discuss the situation. Considering the aggravating factors and her recent history, she'll likely serve at least 2 years, if not more. Does that mean it's finally over? I asked, almost afraid to believe it. As far as civil lawsuits and her attempts to extort money from you, yes, it's probably over. Sarah's going to be too busy fighting criminal charges to continue her campaign against you. A few weeks later, I got a call from Sarah's mom. Barbara and I had always had a cordial relationship, even during the worst times of the marriage. She looked worn down by pain when we met at a cafe near my office. I wanted to apologize, she said after placing her order, avoiding my gaze, for everything Sarah did to you. I and her father, just didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late. You don't need to apologize for her actions, I replied gently, but we do need to. We spent years ignoring the signs, justifying behaviors we should have confronted. Sarah was always complicated. Even as a teenager, she showed that tendency to manipulate situations, to lie when it suited her. She took a deep breath and held back tears. But we always believed she'd overcome it, that it was just a phase. How is she? I asked, surprised by my own genuine concern. Physically, she's fine. Emotionally, she refuses to take any responsibility. In her mind, it's all your fault. Her parents' fault. The system's fault. Everyone's but hers. We sat in silence for a moment. 2 people united by the pain caused by someone they loved in different ways. Jason, Barbara said softly, holding my hand for a moment. I know you don't owe us anything, but if you could just not testify against her at her criminal trial, it might help reduce her sentence. I looked at that broken woman, shattered by her own daughter's tragedy, and felt immense compassion. I wasn't planning on testifying, Barbara. I've already provided all the necessary documentation. What happens next is up to the justice system. She nodded gratefully, and we finished our coffee in a quiet understanding. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. 3 months later, Sarah's trial ended with her being sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. I didn't attend any of the hearings, preferring to leave that chapter of my life behind. One Saturday morning, I decided it was time for a complete clean-out. I gathered all the photographs, letters, and mementos from my marriage to Sarah, including the wedding dress she left behind when she walked out, and some wedding gifts we'd never even used. There was no anger as I sorted through those items. Just a strange sense of detachment, like I was organizing someone else's belongings, a life that no longer belonged to me. The valuable items were donated. The photographs were scanned and stored on a drive I tucked away at the bottom of a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but because I recognized that, despite everything, those moments were still part of my story. The rest, I threw out. I painted my apartment, rearranged the furniture, and even bought new plants for the garden, little changes that symbolized a fresh start. On a quiet afternoon, while I was watering the new plants in the renovated garden, my mom dropped by for a surprise visit. "The place looks different," she remarked, looking around approvingly. "Lighter." "I feel lighter too," I said with a genuine smile. We sat on the freshly painted porch, drinking lemonade and talking about future plans. My scheduled trip to Portugal, her new gardening hobby, my youngest cousin's upcoming wedding. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone enough to get married again?" she asked carefully. I thought for a moment, watching the sun start to set behind the trees in the park next door. "It's not about trusting someone else," I finally replied. "It's about trusting myself, recognizing the signs I ignored, and valuing my inner peace more than the idea of a perfect relationship." My mom nodded understandingly. "You've learned a lot from all this." "The most important thing I learned," I said after taking a sip of lemonade, "is how much time I wasted being a prisoner to Sarah's mind games. Even after the separation, even during the divorce, I still let her take up space in my mind, let her manipulations define my days. And now? Now I understand that true freedom didn't come from the judge's sentence, or the restraining order, or even her prison time. It came when I decided not to respond to her provocations anymore, when I stopped trying to win every little fight and focused on winning the war for my own inner peace." That night, after my mom left, I sat on my new sofa and opened a book I'd bought months ago but never found the peace to read. The pages flowed easily as the quiet house enveloped me in a security I hadn't felt in years. My phone rang, one of my tennis buddies confirming our game the next day. We chatted briefly about the upcoming local tournament, the perfect weather forecast for the weekend, and normal, everyday things that now seemed extraordinary in their simplicity. When we hung up, I realized I hadn't thought about Sarah once during the entire conversation. Not a single flash of bitterness or anxiety. It was as if an invisible weight, which I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was even there, had finally been lifted. I fell asleep that night with a peaceful certainty. The storm had passed, and I wasn't just a survivor. I'd been transformed. The man who once let Sarah define his self-worth and manipulate his emotions was gone. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, and most importantly, finally free. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this.